could join us this evening. Um, this evening's talk, Laundering Anti-Semitism, is being sponsored by the Israel Committee, and the presenter today is a longtime friend of mine. I'll explain our relationship soon, but first I'm going to let you know his very important credentials that he brings to the conversation tonight about laundering anti-Semitism, understanding anti-Semitism on campus today. This is Professor Marc Dollinger, and he holds the Richard and Rhoda Goldman Endowed Chair in Jewish Studies and Social Responsibility at San Francisco State University, as you can see from his banner behind him. He has served as a research fellow at Princeton University Center for the Study of Religion, as well as the Andrew W. Melton Postdoctoral Fellow and Lecturer in Humanities at Bryn Mawr College, where he coordinated the program in Jewish Studies. Professor Dollinger is author of 4 scholarly books in American Jewish history, most recently Black Power, Jewish Politics, Reinventing the Alliance in the 1960s. If you've not read it, it's a great and important book about Black-Jewish relations. I highly recommend it. He's also published entries in the Encyclopedia Judaica, the Encyclopedia of Anti-Semitism, and the Encyclopedia of African American Education. Next book that he's working on right now is called Laundering Anti-Semitism, Jews, Identity Politics in the University, and it traces his experience as an identified Jewish and Zionist professor in the current political climate. And he'll be talking about his experiences on both a right-wing campus and a left-wing campus and how anti-Semitism plays out in different contexts. Professor Dollinger is a past president of both the Jewish Community High School of the Bay and Brandeis Hillel Day School. Dr. Dollinger serves on the boards of the Jewish Community Federation and URJ Camp Newman. He sat on the California Advisory Committee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights, was named Volunteer of the Year by the San Francisco Jewish Community Federation, and was awarded the San Francisco JCRC's Courageous Leader Award. Professor Dollinger has spoken about his research on CNN's Don Lemon tonight, as well as the CNN podcast, Silence is Not an Option, the NFL Network, I have to hear about that, what you talked about in the NFL Network, Marc, ESPN, and Germany's National Public Radio. Just for fun, Dr. Dollinger helped actress Helen Hunt learn about her Jewish roots on the primetime NBC show, Who Do You Think You Are? It's always interesting being a professor and the kinds of interesting things you get to do in your life, including being an advisor for an actress. But most importantly, at least for me, Professor Dollinger, before he had professor or doctor, all those fancy titles, the year we both graduated from college, we ended up in Israel on the same program together for 10 months, volunteering around Israel, learning Hebrew, deepening our engagement with the land and people of Israel and learning our history there as well. And for both of us, really a transformative time of growth and of learning, and propelled us into our professional lives where we're today. And so Professor Dollinger and I have now been friends. It's 36 years, so double chai, Marc. It's amazing. And really, really wonderful to have you here. After he wrote his book on Black Power, which he sent to me very graciously and signed it, I loved it. And then I called him and I said, I'm looking for someone to talk about issues of anti-Semitism on campus. And he said, well, as it turns out, that's exactly what my new book is on. And I'm really delighted that my friend and accomplished professor and author of Laundering Anti-Semitism will be speaking to us tonight. After Professor Dollinger makes his opening remarks, and we'll have minutes also for conversation and discussion. Thank you, Professor Dollinger.
Thank you. So great to be here, and it's exciting in so many ways. Not the least of which is Amy Lieb-Noble, who I now see is here. And wow, so good to see you. Her late father officiated at my bar mitzvah at Temple Beth Ellen Center, and this is Old Home Week. And Amy, I think you actually you will probably know where Kettleman City is, Kettleman City, California. We may have some other, former Californian folk who might know. If you don't know, it's perfectly acceptable because Kettleman City is a truck stop on Interstate 5, which connects Los Angeles and San Francisco. The only reason anyone ever goes to Kettleman City is they need fast food, bathrooms, and gasoline. And then you keep driving north or south, depending on which direction you're going. What was amazing for me, though, is that Kettleman City, on one particular day in my professional life, seemed to have magical, transformational power. Because my last day teaching at a college in Los Angeles, a right-wing college, Pasadena City College, just north of downtown LA, I left there because I had been branded, quote, a self-hating leftist Jew. And the three-year campus anti-Semitism fight grew so intense that I ultimately feared for my physical safety. I resigned my tenure, and I got the job that I have now at San Francisco State University. So, Marcy and I packed up our then young daughters, put them in the car, headed north on Interstate 5. And at the end of the day, when I arrived at my new office at San Francisco State, I had become a right-wing Zionist colonial conspirator. How is it that you can go from being a self-hating leftist Jew to a right-wing Zionist colonialist in a single day? It must have been Kettleman City that did it. Or perhaps it's the larger dynamics of what it is to be Jewish in America, or even a Jewish professor on the college campus. Erev Tov, good evening. I'm throwing in a little Hebrew for Rabbi London, since we learned that together on Ulpan. It's great to reconnect with you. It's good to be here. And just to let you all know, I'm in the middle, or actually more than past the middle, of writing a new book about campus anti-Semitism. It's part memoir, because it's going to share my own stories. And it's part academic because I'm trying to get some deeper lessons out of that. And really what I like to do now is just sort of chat you through the book as I'm going through. And Becky, thank you for your help and organization. I was telling her ahead of time, this is the first time I've given this particular version of the talk as I sort of figure out how I want to present and what I want to do. So I'd love your feedback as well. And I'm actually interested in your feedback on the title. Which Amanda Berman, the founder of Zioness, is the one who actually came up with this title, Laundering Antisemitism, Jews, Identity Politics, and the University, which is really trying to unwind that 400-mile drive and tell the story of how you go from one to another. Now, if this were my class at the university, I always like to give my students an historical question for each day. So if you have access to the chat, I've just put the historical question in the chat, which is, how can we best understand campus anti-Semitism and what can we do with it? And the thesis, which I've also just dropped in there for you to see, while universities should be the last place on earth for anti-Semitism to flourish, I mean, this is supposed to be where smart people go, right? The abuse of academic freedom, the left's turn against Zionism, and contested visions for the very purpose of a university education are all combining to launder, that's the verb I'm using now, to launder a social evil, anti-Semitism, into a seemingly accepted part of academic discourse. In what seems ironic, I was embraced as a white Jew by faculty and students of color when I taught in a right-wing community, but I've been marginalized as a Zionist when I taught in a left-wing community. Holding all of these apparent contradictions defines in many ways campus Jewish life. So what I'd like to do is just give you an overview of two awful incidents in my career, and then offer sort of an analysis of what I think is going on underneath, and then the rabbi and I can chat and take questions, as we go from there. So at Pasadena City College, a two-year community college in LA, one of my colleagues was so excited one day, and she stopped me in the hall to say that they're bringing in Irv Rubin to be a Holocaust speaker. Now, if you don't know Irv Rubin was the head of the Jewish Defense League, which is a right-wing Jewish organization founded by Meir Kahane. And Meir Kahane, when he made Aliyah to Israel, put Irv Rubin in charge of North American operations. And the JDL and Irv Rubin and Meir Kahane are aligned, if you're following what's going on in Israel now, with the ultra right-wing, ministers that Bibi's government has put in. Meir Kahane basically invented their ideology. So that kind of gives you a sense of where they're at. So my colleague was teaching a class with 100 students, 7 professors, And 90% of the students at the school were not white, and probably 99.9% were not Jewish. And I was concerned. So I asked, my colleague, like, why are you picking someone like Irv Rubin to be a Holocaust speaker? Because he's not a scholar. He's not an educator. He has a history of violence. The FBI had designated the JDL a domestic terrorist organization, which brings up safety issues as well as legal issues for the university to be bringing him in. And then I asked, aren't universities supposed to bring in leading thinkers as guest professors? And then, of course, I offered to go find them a real scholar on the Holocaust to come and do their teaching. So when I shared this, my colleagues told me why it was they actually invited him. Turns out he'd appeared on the Jerry Springer show, and ironically, he just passed away today, at age 79. When Irv was on Jerry Springer, he got into a violent confrontation with members of the KKK. And my colleagues said that they were bringing him in because they wanted to recreate an episode of Jerry Springer in the classroom. As one of those 7 said, they wanted to, quote, titillate the students. So then I said, oh my God, right? I said, this is a violation of like so many basic university standards: Holocaust education, student safety, how we're depicting Jews to non-Jewish students. When I shared that, they said, look, don't worry. They said, he's been coming for years and he's never been violent and no one's ever complained. So I said, are you telling him that you're bringing him in as a joke and as a clown and for reality TV? And in fact, you're trying to make him look bad, so now this is like twisting, how bad it is. And they said, no, of course, they're not telling him because they don't want to get him upset. So what followed was actually a 3-year campus anti-Semitism fight, which began with Irv Rubin, but quickly goes to the faculty and the administration of the school and how they handled it. My colleagues defended their treatment of Irv Rubin and the way they wanted to teach the Holocaust by claiming academic freedom. They said they could do whatever they wanted in the classroom. That's what a university is for. And if I was trying to, force them not to do this, then I was actually the one in the wrong. I was violating academic freedom. I was violating their rights. And I actually then became the one who was going against what a college education is supposed to be. As they had said to me, college is a place where you're supposed to debate controversial ideas. And then they portrayed me, to the college president at least, as the one who was trying to shut down a conversation. And they claimed that I was shutting him down because he was on the political right and I'm on the political left. So they said this is actually about the politics between 2 Jews, not about how we're teaching Holocaust education. They went further, and now we'll get into Jewish views of masculinity and some stereotypes there. And none of these faculty are Jewish, just so you know, no one's Jewish there, but me. After the Holocaust, they said Jews needed to be strong, right? And the JDL was strong and I was weak, right? So I sort of now embodied the failure of post-Holocaust Jews to fight for what they wanted. So when I, said, look, you can do what you want. I appreciate academic freedom, but there's also something called academic responsibility, which is like, if you've got the freedom, you have to handle it responsibly. And I critique them on that. A retaliation campaign began. My picture was forwarded to the JDL website where they awarded me their Pig of the Week award. I received an email from a Midwestern member of the JDL in front of a helicopter holding a submachine gun, asking if he needs to come to Pasadena to take care of business. They started re-inviting Irv Rubin to all their classes, right? Just to prove that they could do it. He went to a logic class and spent the hour basically making a logical argument that I was a coward for refusing to debate Irv Rubin, which I refused to do. And then the professor actually went and changed the final exam to a single question. Was Professor Dollinger a coward for refusing to debate Irv Rubin? When I went to campus police, after I was getting these threatening emails and letters, the police chief refused an escort and told me, he said, the world needs more Irv Rubins. This was getting incredible. I had an African-American sociologist office mate who supported me. And when he supported me, campus police came into his class in the middle of class in front of his students and arrested him on a false claim that he had threatened a white woman. My dean, the first female dean in the history of our college, supported me, and the president fired her. And when she went to the president and said, "Why did you fire me?" the president said, because you supported Marc in the anti-Semitism fight. As you can imagine, this started picking up attention. Of course, the school newspaper did. Irv Rubin was given an op-ed, and that's where he called me a self-hating Jew. Then the LA Times picked up the story. It ultimately made it to the federal government, where there was an investigation by the United States Commission on Civil Rights and an investigation by the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And both of those findings actually found for my position. Fortunately, my dean was given a nice, cash dispensation after her firing. At this point, though, for me, it was clear that I could not be physically safe on this campus, and this was not a place for Jewish people to be. So I offered a resignation letter with my tenure, and I left. In the few months between, like when I told them I was leaving and I actually left, we heard news that Irv Rubin had been under FBI surveillance the whole time this was going on, that he and a co-conspirator were planning on bombing a mosque in Culver City in Los Angeles and bombing the offices of Congressman Darrell Issa from Orange County, California. He is a Lebanese-American member of Congress. Once this news broke and sort of we explained what the threat really was, it was quite profound. And then in my first semester up here at SF State, I got news that on the morning of the first day of trial, Rubin jumped from the third floor of LA County Jail, fell into a coma, and several days later died of his wounds. So that story was quite profound, quite traumatic, and spins lots of different angles on everything from anti-Semitism to academic freedom. So with this, I kind of felt like it's going to be a whole lot better, when you get up here to SF State. It was been widely known. I don't know if in Chicago you've heard, but SF State is considered the most anti-Semitic university in the country. And that's usually because it is a far leftist political campus. It has a lot of anti-Zionism, which moves into anti-Semitism all too often. The good news for me was that the Goldman family, and they're the descendants of Levi Strauss from Levi's genes, had endowed the very first chair at SF State's history in Jewish studies and social responsibility. They picked that name because anytime anti-Semites are going to argue that Jews are not socially responsible, they wanted a scholar trained in it who would be willing to go public and defend Jews on campus. I was actually interviewed by 32 different people in a 3-day interview. It was quite intense, including the university president, who said, this is a political place and this is a political appointment. Can you handle it? And I said, if we could take a seat, President, I'd like to tell you what just happened to me at Pasadena City College. And you'll see this probably won't be much worse. So the good news is, for my first 14 years on campus, things were really calm. And this is about 5 years ago now, 4 years ago, our Hillel students invited the mayor of Jerusalem to come to campus to speak, Nir Barkat. He was the mayor at the time. And as is always occurs on our campus, anytime a pro-Israel person speaks, we will have an anti-Israel demonstration against them. And we expect these, and there's actually a procedure by which we recognize the right to speak, the right to protest, except on this particular day, the protesting students came inside and began chanting, and then they brought loudspeakers in with them, and it was so loud that you couldn't even hear Mayor Barkat speak. So Mayor Barkat could not speak, because for the entire 60 minutes that he was there trying to speak, it was so loud that he couldn't be heard. They began rhythmic chants against Mayor Barkat. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That was one of them. Long live the Intifada was another one. And this is a direct quote, so I'll just tell you now, it's going to have a profanity in it. Get the fuck off our campus was another chant, and that one's going to become important later in the story. Marcy, my wife, was with me at this, and she's a first grade Jewish day school teacher. I'd like to say she whispered in my ear, but she yelled in my ear so I could hear her. She said, I get the rhythmic chants, but I wish they wouldn't use so much profanity, when they're chanting, to have a little bit of humor in a difficult spot. Well, at the end of the hour, Mayor Barkat left. And as he left, the students who were protesting him, of course, celebrated and cheered. They were giving each other high fives. And when that was done, they turned from the back door where Barkat had left to the front of the room where the Jewish students were now still seated. And they started chanting to the Jewish students, get the fuck off our campus. And at that moment, in my mind, we went from what could have been a political disagreement with the mayor of Jerusalem, who is a Likudnik, and probably most of the Jews on our campus didn't like him anyway for his political views. But then it turned into blatant anti-Semitism, because now you have one group of students telling another group of students they should get the F off our campus. There was campus police in the room, and the dean of students was in the room, and they did nothing. So when it was all over, I walked up to the dean of students and said, what just happened is like a violation of California state law and federal law and university policy. I just went through it. And I said, those words, get the F off our campus, when they flew over your head and flew over campus police head and landed on our Jewish students, it actually is accepted by the university until such time as you all make a public statement that that was wrong and you disagree. It went up to the university president, this is the previous president, who refused to make a statement. And then when I sought a meeting with him to talk to him about it, he refused a meeting and said that Jewish concerns were not a presidential issue. Then, because this got instant international publicity, because not only did it hit the U.S. media, but it was on Israel television that night, because they were taking iPhone videos of all of this stuff. So millions of dollars of Jewish donations stopped that day. Right. And Jewish donors were letting the university know that they're not going to stand for this. So the director of advancement, the fundraising chair, called me and said, what's going on? We're losing millions of dollars. I said, well, didn't you hear? The next morning at 8 o'clock, he had me in front of the university president. Right. Which is also part of the painful truth that only by exercising, the power we have over our donations were we able to even get attention. In a series of meetings, one of them with 6 Jewish community leaders who came out in support of us, the president said that this was a case of what he called Zionist power. So I actually interrupted the meeting and I said to the president, I said, Zionist power is actually code for Jewish power. And Jewish power is an anti-Semitic trope, and I told him about the protocols of Zion. I gave him like a 3-minute little lesson on what his words were. And this is a visual, so you have to see me. This is how he responded when I told him that. He nods his head like this, up and down. Well, it only got worse from there in terms of exercising pressure. Ultimately, I went with the ADL and San Francisco Hillel to Sacramento. We met with a dozen elected representatives. We had a letter written to his boss, the chancellor of the system. 2 lawsuits were filed against SF State. I was brought in as a lead fact witness. I literally had my suit on the chair ready to go in for the first day of trial when I got a phone call from my attorney that they'd reached a legal settlement. As we know, sometimes the day trials begin, lawyers decide to do it. It is the most path-breaking legal settlement on campus anti-Semitism in the country. Not only was it 10 times more than we had asked for, but now has become the standard for universities across the country. When they're dealing with stuff, they just see what happened at SF State. I'll just share that some months later, I received a text from a senior member of the administration, and it said, check your email. And knowing who it was who sent it and knowing the code, I realized that this was probably an email from the university president announcing his departure. And sure enough, he decided to retire. Though informally we understand that the chancellor of the Cal State system, which has 500,000 students in it, that he took personal attention here and had him go. So those are the two, that's just, the overview of how awful each of those instances were. And here's the analysis, right? Here's what I think is going on in a deep way. At PCC, Jews were described as weak, as marginalized, as outsiders who are bringing harm to the campus as a result. That's what right-wing anti-Semites do. This is what the Nazis did. Jews are subhuman and dumb and stupid and don't get what everybody else gets, even at the most basic level of intelligence. But at SF State, because I'm a Zionist, I was perceived as strong, privileged, and controlling, with the same result, which is bringing harm to campus. So, if you're Jewish in this sense, and this is not just campus anti-Semitism, you can't win for losing, because right-wing anti-Semites say you're too weak, and left-wing anti-Semites say you're too strong. And the joke I have about Kettleman City, is that I got both of those on the same day. So what are the causes? One, fundamentally, it's an abuse of academic freedom. Just because you have the freedom to do something doesn't mean you should. So in my book, I'm writing a lot about academic responsibility, and I'm making calls for my faculty colleagues and administrators every time they throw out academic freedom. It's true, it's hard to fight against that in a university setting. So I say, why don't we talk about whether or not that was a responsible choice they made? Was it a professional choice? Does it reflect somebody who has a PhD to do or say something like that? And then we can go after them on professional grounds. Left and right, leftist and rightist tropes about anti-Semitism colliding, as I just said, that Jews are super powerful and subhuman. But really the thing that I find most fascinating is I've discovered conflicting notions about the very purpose of a college education. And I want to tell a story to illustrate this. So in Pasadena, my office mate was a Black sociologist, 20 years older than me, who became my teacher, a mentor, a dear friend. He's the one who actually led me through the entire anti-Semitism fight, because he spent his whole career on fighting racism. And since you're in Chicago, I'll tell you, he is the former president of Malcolm X Community College on the South Side. So he has had quite a distinguished career in education. And we had a walk-through office. So my office was in front by the door. You'd walk through mine. His office was in the back with the window. So his students would walk back and forth through my office for office hours. And we did our best to coordinate our schedules, so the other one would have privacy. But one time, a male Black athlete comes in, sits down for office hours. And of course, I'm overhearing the office hours. And the student athlete's talking about playing on Sundays, which means he wants to go to the NFL. And my office mate, Milton, just starts getting in his face, telling him he's not a good football player. He's not going to make it into the NFL. And then asks him about his study habits, whether he's on drugs, what his father's influence or lack thereof in his life, what's going on with his mom and the burdens and stresses on his mom. And this poor student, by the time he walked out, he was just chin down and he was just utterly deflated. So I walked back and I sat down in that seat where that student was, and I looked at Milton, and what I said is, what the F are you doing? You could get yourself fired for stuff like this, You can't treat a student like that. And this is not what office hours are about. And then, of course, he just gave me one of his big smiles and said, white boy, he said, I'm a Black man in America. I have tenure at a university. I'm a former college president, and I'm a sociologist of race. And I know where that young man is heading. He is heading to jail or 6 feet under. And it's my job to stop that from happening. And it's my job to get him refocused on his studies. And so then Milton, making a little joke, says, what do you talk about in your office hours, Marc? And I said, what's your thesis statement? Do you have your assertion? How or why is it true? What's the significance? And they said, that's the difference between being a white professor and a Black professor. For me, in my world, for my students, because his field was sociology of race and ethnicity, I am irresponsible as a professor if I don't get into the personal face of my students. And you don't have to do that. because American Jewish life by the 21st century is a whole lot better. And I tried to think, do I ever have a case like that? Have I ever had like, I must, for that to work, I have to be like a professor at like Columbia in like 1900, like the only Jewish person with tenure at Columbia. And there's got to be some Yiddish speaking kid fresh off the boat who comes to office hours. But that actually, I didn't really see the parallel there. Well, I got to San Francisco State, and I just made this the last couple of weeks as I've been writing the book. This just popped into my brain. One day I had two Israeli American students of mine come into my office, and they were very upset and they were crying. And they shared with me that the previous day on social media, the president of the Palestinian student activist group had put a picture of himself holding a knife on Facebook. And the caption of the picture said, "I seriously cannot get over how much I love this blade. It is the sharpest thing I own and cuts through everything like butter. And just holding it makes me want to stab an Israeli soldier." Turns out with 30,000 students, this one guy with the knife was in class, with the same class with the two of these two, and they were afraid that they would literally be stabbed in class the next day. Well, I should say that what Milton taught me with his student was something called the Identity Project. The Identity Project says a college professor's responsibility is to build the identity of their students. He's a Black professor, he has Black students, the Blackness matters. And he is there to teach them about institutional racism, about getting an education and a college degree, about figuring out how they can manage themselves. And it's like everything he's doing is intimately related to the identity of his students. That's not how I came into the academy, and that's not how I learned what college was about. For me, college was learning how to think critically and write critically. And that's what I did in grad school, and that's what I did in my career. And I did not need to care about the identity of my students when they came to office hours. I didn't need to care about my own identity until those two Israelis showed up. You better believe I was a Jewish professor at that moment, and I'm on the phone right up the line as high as I can get the administration to campus police to do everything I can do to protect them. And then at that moment, it dawned on me, I just had my Milton moment. I had just reacted to those two students in the same way that Milton had. And now I, as a Jewish studies professor, had embraced the Identity Project. Here's the challenge. I came from the school of thought that politics are not in the classroom in the university. Our job is to teach them how to think. We don't care what position they take or what thesis, as long as they argue it well, they can get an A. The Identity Project does not believe that. The Identity Project, for example, is anti-racist, because for Milton, not to teach anti-racism as part of his pedagogy in his classes would be to go against everything he stands for and the whole reason why it is he's sitting in the university. So it was easy for me to say, okay, Jewish people are enjoying the privilege of the critical third-person dispassionate university. We're not into the Identity Project, until I got to SF State and jumped into the Identity Project. We love Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, social justice. Wouldn't it be great if the university education was about teaching young people to graduate and then go fix the world? I think that's a very Jewish concept. Except, what if you think that Zionism is racism? At my university, that is a dominant belief. If you believe that Zionism is racism and you want to be anti-racist, you must bring anti-Zionism into your college classroom. And not just a college classroom about Israel or Palestine. You need to bring it into every single classroom because anti-racism belongs everywhere. So I get phone calls from Jewish leaders whenever one of the professors does this at SF State. And they're like, get them fired, get rid of their tenure, you know? And I said, so you're asking me to promote my Jewish identity to take a pro-Zionist position against a fellow colleague who's taking an anti-Zionist position, which means, ironically, by embracing the Identity Project, as a Jew, I am empowering the anti-Zionists to use the Identity Project against us. So ultimately, I think we are caught between the identity project, where our Jewish identities matter. And Rabbi London, when I give my final lecture, and you're all invited, I have it on Zoom, let me know if you're interested, Jewish Studies and the Meaning of Life, I open with the question, what's the difference between a Jewish studies professor and a rabbi? And the answer I give is, a rabbi's job is to promote Jewish identity, mine isn't. My job is to build better minds, right? I just happen to do it in a Jewish studies way, except maybe not so much, because maybe I need to protect Jewish students like rabbis do as well, in order to see that. So what can we do to fight campus anti-Semitism? Take a long, slow, deep breath first, which is to say, given my two stories, which I think are probably two of the worst ones ever, we're doing really well in the university as Jews. We're disproportionate at every level. We're in the Ivy Leagues. Ivy League presidents are Jewish. Fundamentally, universities are really good places for Jewish students. Number two, support the critical thinking approach to a university, which is send your kids or your grandkids, encourage them to go and be challenged, to show up in these places and to have these debates. It'd be good if they have a Jewish studies department where they can go and retreat. And I get a few students in tears, each year because they heard something that they never heard before and they want to sort of process it. And then after we talk about it, I say, welcome to SF State, right? This is a place where you have an opportunity to learn. Support the Identity Project as well as critical thinking. Get them involved in Hillel. They have a lot of Israel Action Committees and things like that. And it's a wonderful opportunity to explore a lot of these complexities if you do it surrounded by your fellow Jewish students. Ultimately, I like the phrase both and instead of either or, which is to say that the more we can hold these complexities and the more we can see seemingly contradictory things happening at the same time, the better it is for us to sort of draw alliances on campus with other student groups for sure, and then ultimately when they graduate with other people as well. So my final irony is that when I was at PCC at the right-wing school, faculty of color and students of color rallied behind me instantly. For those 3 years, we were together. We actually co-sponsored a town hall on diversity, where each of us brought the challenges we face: racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, and 400 people showed up and 30 community organizations co-sponsored. And we even brought the college president to come and witness this. And I got a real sense that there's a way that we can bring anti-Semitism into conversation with these other forms of discrimination. Of course, at SF State, I'm not welcome in those places because as a Zionist, they consider me a racist. So therefore, having a racist in an anti-racist space doesn't work. That makes me sad. So what I say now, when folks say, what should we do? Go with the PCC example. And let's find ways and let's find communities where we can see that we're not in competition. It's called the Oppression Olympics. It's not about who faces more oppression than anyone else. It's about the fact that all of us are facing marginalization and vulnerability. And it wouldn't be nice if we could all sit down together and work together. So that's what I'm working towards. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Rabbi, and however you'd like to proceed.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those stories and for your experiences, Marc. I think I'd like to start by asking a first question. It gets, complicated on campus, so the issues of, anti-Zionism versus anti-Semitism. Sometimes anti-Zionism becomes anti-Semitism, and sometimes it's more political. As you were pointing out, that because Zionism is associated with racism, it means that Jews who are Zionists can't be part of those conversations. And I see the difficulty there, that we can't look at oppressions together. We can't then bring Jews together with Blacks or others if we happen to be Zionists as well. So I want you to tease this apart a little bit more, because I think that one of the struggles that I see is this conflation between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. I wonder if you can define, when does anti-Zionism become anti-Semitism, and when is it not? When is it just a political stance in support of the Palestinian people, in support perhaps of Israel being a state for all of its people and not the idea of two states, or whatever people might see as a political solution, but really is more of a pro-Palestinian stance, and not necessarily an anti-Semitic stance, even if it's anti-Zionist.
Thank you. A great question. And in the 4 hours we have left, I'd be happy to answer it. I actually want to start personally before I answer that, because that's like the key question. I made a decision. I've been at SF State for 20 years now. I made a decision when I arrived, knowing what was coming, that if there was anti-Israelism on campus, I was not going to get too upset. And if there was anti-Zionism on campus, I wasn't going to get too upset. But when there was anti-Semitism, or when anti-Zionism clearly, without debate or argument, is actually anti-Semitic, then I'm going to be in 1,000%. And that was about self-preservation, because I was afraid I was going to burn out, coming from the PCC experience when I clearly burned out. And I said, if I'm going to have a long-term career on this campus, I've got to draw some boundaries and borders for my own emotional self, and I faced some critique from people who think that I didn't jump fast enough on some of the anti-Zionism that they consider to be anti-Semitic. And I will just say I'm quite pleased with the lines that I've drawn. So I believe that Palestinians have a right to be really pissed off and angry and upset, because 1948, they lost the war, they lost autonomy, and they're really mad. So anytime, by the way, San Francisco has the second largest population of Palestinians and Palestinian Americans in the United States after Detroit. And since we are the city,
Chicago has the largest.
Chicago is the largest, more than Detroit?
The largest Palestinian community. Detroit has the largest Arab community, but Chicago is the largest Palestinian community.
All right, thank you. So we are number 2 or 3, and for that, and because we're the public university, we have a relatively large population of Palestinian students. So so we have a whole lot of activism. I'll give an example. I had a Palestinian student in my U.S. history class who switched over and took my anti-Semitism class, which I really appreciated. And we got to Zionism, and a student asked, what is Zionism? And before I could say, you clearly didn't do the reading, because that was the reading, she blurted out, Zionism is killing babies. And that did not come from a place of trying to be provocative or from a place of politics, because I'd actually known this student for 2 years and was quite close to the student as it goes. It came from an emotional place. And she actually, after class, kept apologizing to me for having said that. And I said, no, actually, you're what a university is all about. So I do not believe that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism per se. Turns out there are Jewish anti-Zionists. The Neturei Karta, right-wing, ultra-Orthodox Jews don't believe that there should be a state of Israel until the Messiah. And there's an argument that says American Jews aren't Zionists because we chose to stay here. And if Zionism is living in Israel or having your plane ticket, which was the old definition, by the way, the new definition is you can call yourself a Zionist but not really be one, because you don't actually think that you need to move there to be safe because we're living here. And I don't want to get in that debate with people, and I'll also tell you, we have a whole lot of Jewish anti-Zionists on our campus. So as soon as you start getting into that, then all the Jews who are anti-Zionist are going to start screaming and yelling, I'm Jewish and I'm anti-Zionist. So I'm looking for a trope. I'm looking for a classic anti-Semitic trope that's getting mixed in with the anti-Zionist rhetoric, which is to say we have a lot of conflicts in the world. We have a lot of wars in the world. We have a lot of two sides of a conflict where they can't stand each other and they're screaming and yelling at each other. And in every conflict, you're allowed to be mad and scream and yell at your enemy. In this particular conflict, you're not allowed to characterize your enemy in any of the classic tropes. And at that point, that's when I intervene.
Thank you. Looks like we already have a hand up. Marc and Barbara Schoenfield.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for what you've told us so far. Having handled a litigation against U of I campus in Chicago over attacks on Jewish students years ago, I have a question about the lawsuit and the settlement you told us about. A few years after that, as I'm sure you know, the university's campus climate assessment report found that 65% of Jewish students felt the need to hide their identity at times. 11% that had experienced anti-Semitism at least occasionally, and 44% felt they are blamed for the actions of the Israeli government. So did that settlement accomplish anything? I'm not trying to take that question one way or another, but I'm just wondering.
Yeah, so first of all, great to meet you. Thank you for your legal work on that. And I can actually say, yes, it has, because 4 hours ago, we had our meeting of the Jewish Campus Climate Committee. And your question was actually our topic. We are in partnership with International Hillel and with the Academic Engagement Network, and we spent 2 years now in a process of implementing the legal settlement. That's the technical thing we're doing, but really what we're just trying to do is improve Jewish campus climate. And Academic Engagement Network shared with us, by the way, they run national trainings for administrators across the country on Jewish campus climate. They're going to be using San Francisco State as the positive model for exactly how you should do things at the end of this year when they close off the current cohort. We have a new university president, Lynn Mahoney. And she is just fantastic. And she reached out early on and actually had my wife and I over for dinner in her home. And we have 4,000 teaching faculty at SF State. And I said to her, I said, I really appreciate the dinner in your home. And I also know that not every professor gets to have dinner in your home. And I kind of know why I do, because I was in the lead in the campus anti-Semitism fight. She has taken a direct personal interest. It is to the point where I am, by the way, on Friday afternoon, she sends me Shabbat Shalom texts. She sends me Shana Tova. I was in Warsaw last week at the 80th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and she's communicating, like she is totally connected. And I said to her, we are doing really well. You have a really big job. As far as I'm concerned, it's okay to hand it off, to one of your VPs or one of your deans, because I appreciate it. So we're in a good moment now. The way I explain it is we're always going to have everything I described in terms of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. We're not going to be able to change the left. What we need is an administration that understands what a college education is about and what the law is. If they do that and know that, we are much more successful in creating an environment where students are going to do a lot of learning on a lot of perspectives and not suffering from discrimination. I'll give you one example. Actually, we had this hit the news. We had a Zoom meeting where an anti-Zionist on the Zoom meeting ordered the Hillel person out of the meeting because they were a Zionist, and that is like a violation of everything you can imagine. Typically, I hear about these things about 12 seconds after they happen. That's kind of how our system works. Before I could even hear about it, the vice president of student affairs had sent an email to 40,000 people in the university community saying what happened, calling it anti-Semitism, explaining that all the disciplinary procedures that are happening, and saying that this is antithetical to what San Francisco State stands for. So to me, that was a nice reflection. We have almost every single one of our senior administrators is new from when the story I told.
Veronica, looks like you have your hand raised. You have a question.
Hi, I'm actually currently a college student on a small campus just a few hours outside of Chicago. And so first that, because that is like, it makes this very personal to me, especially as I've been in that process of converting Judaism for the last few months, really. But I guess, and I've definitely noticed this dialectic and this dynamic, but the thing I was wondering about, because I find I see this a lot, particularly more on Instagram, where I follow some more Zionist leaning accounts, but the way that Zionism and that defensive Zionism gets utilized both in the United States and Israel towards very reactionary politics. So I see like what is it, the like anti-BDS laws, and then it's like that same law, you can copy that, and like you can make you can make a law that prevents people from speaking out in defense of trans lives. Like you could do that. I could literally see Montana doing that. I'm not from there, but they literally just silenced their only trans representative, if anyone's been hearing about that. And so like, because I'm trans, that's also like, you know, this, I feel like this dialectic can get used to become really reactionary, but I think I also see that on like with anti-Zionists. And then the whole other thing is like, so we don't have a Jewish studies department at Knox, but my department, because I'm an ANSO major, anthropology, sociology, it's a combined department, has a lot of Jewish professors, and many of them are anti-Zionist. And I mean, I've been talking to them, but it seems like they have a very like narrowly defined way of looking at it.
Yeah, so thank you for those comments. And I got a bunch of things I think that you've uncovered. First, one thing I'm finding is that and maybe Veronica, your experiences, the definition of Zionism in left-wing spaces is a flattened definition. It's basically the far right wing of the Likud. It's called revisionist Zionism, you know,
Right.
studied it. And one thing that I'm trying to do on my campus, and we actually have an endowed chair now in Israel studies, which is great, is say, guess what? There's a whole lot of different forms of Zionism. There's actually debates among Zionists about what it is and what you do. There's 500,000 Israelis in the streets of Israel now debating what Zionism is. And wouldn't it be great if a university would spend more time talking about the varieties and the experiences and what forms Zionism, rather than flattening it to that. And the other thing, Veronica, that I take from your words is the influence of intersectional identities in this, which is to say, our undergraduates have multiple identities for which they claim, and sometimes they're overlapping, and sometimes they could be perceived as conflicting. Jews of color, for example, who in some places will be showing up with the Black Student Union, which would be an anti-Zionist space, and then come over to Hillel, which is a pro-Zionist space, and how challenging that is. I don't know, Veronica, if you've heard, but we have just, and this actually relates to Marc's question from before on how my university is doing. 3 weeks ago, we had an anti-trans activist come to our campus from a group.
Was that like Billboard Chris or something? He's really terrible and
awful person.
Yeah.
Who attracted hundreds of people, and we feared violence, and the entire university really activated. And then as soon as they got a little attention from what happened 3 weeks ago, they decided to come back, and they had RSVPs from over 1,000 people, and we didn't have a room big enough, so it had to be outside. And our entire university campus mobilized in a pro-trans way. And I'll share with you that in the meeting I had 3 hours ago on the Jewish campus climate, and this kind of goes to part of these complexities, I said to the VP and to the dean on the call, I said, given like what this administration is doing to protect trans lives in the last 3 weeks, like we're totally cool with Jewish campus life right now. And we understand that in the university setting, there's so much going on, and it would be so much better if sort of all of us look after everyone else, because not only is that a nice, righteous Jewish thing to do, but it also turns out that there are Jewish people who cut across all these sorts of identity markers, and our assumptions about who is Jewish and what is Jewish just break down with our young people on the campus.
Right. Like, I feel like I would go to like, yeah, exactly. Like you were saying, I'd go to like Common Ground, which is our like queer students organization on campus. And it's not like explicitly anti-Zionist, but the assumption is that it is. I'm actually a part of their exec as well, but I've been since I started at Knox. But then I'd go to like the Jewish Club, which is the equivalent of Hillel. They used to be affiliated with Hillel, but I think they changed that before during the pandemic, which, and there it's like much more Zionist, because like the only few people there are like Zionist, and like.
If we're going to take a student-centered view, which I like to do as a faculty member, the more attention, those of us in generations above the most undergraduates take to the intersectional identities of our Jewish students, to the variety of places where they are identifying and being, and then what that is doing to conventional ideas of what Jewish identity is. I think the more in touch we will be, and the more service we will be able to provide to our young people. So thank you, Veronica.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Sheldon and Ray Eisenberg, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the debates between Jews on Zionism and anti-Zionism within the Jewish community. Now, I know, and maybe you can speak to this, there's a historical lineage of this. Many of our people came out of the Russian Empire, at least in America. And, there are Jews from that era that were fervent Zionists looking to go to Israel. There were Jewish nationalists, and there's those who didn't want to have anything to do with Judaism and became socialists fighting for the common man, peasants. So I know there's a lineage here, but it does concern me as to what's going on in our own Jewish life in America. And some people know I had a concern about coming into the Evanston community, that it seemed synagogues were lined up very differently in terms of those who were advocates of J Street and those who were advocates of AIPAC. And it's like these two groups don't talk to one another. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so Sheldon's asking a hard question, and Sheldon, I'll tell you, you may not like my answer because you're actually asking the easy question, because it's even worse than you. Which is to say, there's a whole lot of anti-Zionist Jews today, and it's coming from a lot of different places, politically and theologically, which complicates the idea that Zionism is Judaism. That the argument is, on my campus, I'm anti-Zionist, I'm not anti-Semitic. That, of course, is an anti-Semitic statement, because it means that you have a Jewish person has to deny their Zionism in order to get included in their group, and that itself is something that they shouldn't be doing. And the moment we try to make claims on Zionism, we're going to get these anti-Zionist Jews coming up and saying that you could be Jewish and anti-Zionist. So for Marc's comment, the legal settlement said, I think something like the university had to acknowledge that most Jews identify as Zionists. They did it sort of like as a majority statement to try to navigate that. Here's the harder one, Sheldon. What if there's disagreements between Zionists, amongst Zionist Jews, on how to fight campus anti-Semitism? So this is in the public eye, so I'll share this publicly. We've been having over the last year a dispute at my alma mater, Cal Berkeley, because in the law school, there were several law school student groups that changed their bylaws to say that a Zionist could never speak to them, to their group, even if they weren't speaking about Israel, like on anything. Like if you were a Zionist, you were canceled completely. And the dean of the law school is Jewish, and Cal Berkeley has an awesome Israel studies program with several top-notch, internationally known Israel studies scholars, and they dealt with it. They dealt with it internally, and they were all happy. And then, and I'll also say that an individual who has been my #1 phone call, someone who has helped me at SF State, and actually helped me at PCC, Ken Marcus, the very author of the textbook I use in my anti-Semitism class, put out an op-ed, criticizing it. Barbara Streisand retweeted the op-ed, and as soon as she retweeted it, the whole thing, went viral. And we had a situation where we now had two groups of Jewish leaders with different strategies on how to handle what was going on. And they started having dueling op-eds back and forth. And Jewish leadership called me here in the Bay Area, and one of them was going to go meet with the chancellor at Berkeley and said, "What's your advice?" I said, "My advice is you're sunk." Because you can't go to the chancellor of a university and ask the chancellor to pick which Jewish side they're gonna be on and which Jewish side they're not. It's up to us in Jewish leadership to meet and decide what our strategy is, and then together go to university leadership and make the claim. So that continues to be painful for me, and we work really hard at SF State to have an organized group of Jewish leaders and campus leaders, so that when things come up, we all sit down and we all agree there's going to be consensus, because that's our best way of moving things forward.
Danny London.
Hi, Mark. It's been a couple of years.
Good to see you.
Great to see you too. And thank you for your talk. This is really interesting to hear about your experience on two different campuses, or I guess three. So it seems clear to me, both from my own reading on the topic and from your remarks, that there is a widespread movement to cancel Zionists and Zionism on campus, to use the term that you just used, which I think is a good one to use here. But I think it could be easy to walk away from your talk concluding that there is rampant anti-Semitism on campus, and I don't know if you intend that on campuses across the country. And I don't know if that's what you intend, but I'm concerned about us drawing conclusions that anti-Semitism is rampant based on efforts to cancel Zionists, even really foul and or even violent attempts to cancel Zionists or Zionism on campus, and to particularly in an environment in which we know that there is genuine anti-Semitism in the world and in the United States, that has manifested itself in violent acts against Jews, murderous acts against Jews, and overtly anti-Semitic language being used. So I wonder if you would speak to that point and just clarify for us what your sense is as to what's going on, not just on the campuses where you have been involved, but more broadly across the country, and to what extent you think it is anti-Semitism that is laundering itself as anti-Zionism, and to what extent you think it's really just a movement to cancel Zionism among people who are angry about Zionists' association with Israel, a state that is oppressing Palestinians. And if I could just tag one more question onto that, your comment that you look for a trope, an anti-Semitic trope, I see your point there, but I even wonder if sometimes it's too tempting for us to point to something that can be called an anti-Semitic trope as a way to tag anti-Zionism as being anti-Israel, as being anti-Semitism. And the example that comes to mind for me is Representative Ilhan Omar's comment that it was all about the Benjamins, which was a statement implying that members of Congress were basically being bribed to support Israel, a comment that to me doesn't seem completely outlandish. And yet she was accused of anti-Semitism, continues to be accused of anti-Semitism based on, well, that being one comment that brought charges of anti-Semitism against her.
Thank you. Those three big questions there. First of all, you have articulated the biggest argumentative challenge of my book. And my editors so far who've been reading early drafts are like, first of all, how could you ever still be a professor after the two experiences you went through? And second, how could anyone ever go to a college campus after reading your book? And that's not my goal, right? Because I think, as you were perhaps intimating, Jewish college students are effectively safe on college campuses, even on these campuses where we're dealing with anti-Semitism. This goes to something called risk assessment. And this is something I've learned in my work actually on race, which is lots of things can be happening, but what really matters is what risk assessment is done against it. So if we do a risk assessment of Jews on a college campus, the risk level is very, very low. And that's why I've been around 20 years at SF State. I love the job. And when students come in upset because they just heard something they didn't know, and I say, well, welcome to the university, welcome to SF State. You know, this is why you are here. Since World War II, American Jews have enjoyed, most American Jews, quite a privileged existence, especially in the world of the university. I had a few sentences in my opening to try to frame it that way before I went into it. My two particular stories is going to attract readers and interest of people who are going to disagree with my basic optimism. So I need to find out a way that I can communicate and weave my risk assessment and my optimism through some really awful stories. That's a rhetorical challenge to figure it out. Now your other question about, it's all about the Benjamins. This is a deep conflict. So my first book, my dissertation, was a history of Jews and liberalism in modern America. And it was published by Princeton. And what I didn't know at the time, and one of the reasons why I was able to get it published by Princeton, I later realized, is it was a book about Jewish power and Jewish money. I didn't identify the book that way, but historiographically in the field, no Jewish studies scholar had ever written a book that talked about how powerful and rich Jews are. For me, in my life, it was just integrated and I just wrote the history. And if you take some of my paragraphs from that book and you have Ilan Omer read them, she could be accused of anti-Semitism. So what do you do when Jews are powerful and rich? And those are two classic tropes. And that's the point we're in. So I think context matters. And then ultimately, I think really these things get politicized and people just jump too quickly at an opportunistic moment, whatever side they're on, in order to take advantage. And that's a place for someone like me, who is as deeply ingrained in the fight and experiencing anti-Semitism and is hopeful and optimistic. And I do identify myself on the left and as a progressive still, to navigate that space. I guess I close with the phrase both and. This is a case of both and. And I've had my students, non-Jewish students in my university classes, read me back my stuff, and then basically say this sounds anti-Semitic. And Jews are disproportionately powerful in the universities at every level, from university presidents down to undergraduates. And that's not anti-Semitic, that's truth. So, yeah. Thank you for that. And maybe later on we can reconnect, because I'm really curious about this title, Laundering Anti-Semitism, because you mentioned a spin on it, and I'd like to learn more about how it landed on me. So.
Sean Fields.
So I am generally supportive of DEI programs, diversity, equity, inclusion programs. However, as I'm sure you're aware, the Stanford program with its anti-Semitism, and I've been told by the Brandeis Center and Stop Anti-Semitism that there are a number of DEI college programs and university programs that are just filled with anti-Semitism. What's your sense of all that?
I think that's overplayed, honestly. And I read the Stanford example, and I'm familiar with the individuals on all sides of this. Let's go to both and, which is to say, when there are attempts to fight, let's say, anti-Black racism to begin with, but certainly communities of color more generally, in my mind, does not need the inclusion of white Jews. Or to say, if white Jews are not included, it does not mean that those people are being anti-Semitic. It means that in 21st century America, DEI is focused on those who are defined as racially marginal, and white Jews today are not, even though at other points in history and in other places on earth, we certainly are not considered white and have not been. I mean, we suffered a genocide as a consequence. So I think it's a difficult, challenging thing for Jews to sort of sit with being marginal and not marginal simultaneously. So I'm good. I'm actually fine with the DEI, and I don't think exclusion of Jews is problematic per se. And here's where I do the both and I'm working with our College of Ethnic Studies on this, because rather than go to an adversarial place, and that's what I don't like about these pushbacks, is it's assuming an adversarial position. I actually believe that the history of Jews and anti-Semitism is something that those fighting anti-Black racism can learn a whole lot about. And as we know from Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, the Nazis learned how to do genocide against Jews by studying the Jim Crow South to see what the US did with Blacks. So my course on anti-Semitism is now an elective in the College of Ethnic Studies. And I want, basically students of color to come take anti-Semitism because I want them to see that white presenting people can be not white, and that there are close parallels between what happens when you dehumanize a group, whether you're dehumanizing Jews or Blacks in this case, and you end up in the same place. And that to me is the ultimate sign and possibility for allyship. The example that I'll give more specifically is here in California, we've passed an ethnic studies requirement in the high schools. And there's been a huge movement by Jews here in California to get the ethnic studies requirement to demand that Jews be included. I am opposed to that. It's like, as I've talked to my colleagues in ethnic studies, they say, we would like one class in high school that doesn't tell the story of white people. I mean, that's how they describe it. Just one. And as soon as you put in the Jewish experience, then that's perceived as undermining. I thought we had a great opportunity to reach out in a more sophisticated way with communities of color, to talk about what's called the social construction of race, and that Jews are the perfect example to show how it is that racial composition is a tricky business. And instead, we just got really adversarial really quickly. 40,000 emails were sent to the committee in charge of this in Sacramento, mostly from Jewish Californians upset. And then the entire faculty involved with it all quit because they were upset about what that was going on. And I think it'll take us 20 years or longer to heal those wounds.
Veronica.
Yeah, you were just talking about the social construction of race. Oh, and I have to leave soon because I have my Intro to Judaism class. So
I do not want to be responsible for your tardiness.
yeah, don't worry, but that's at 9 Central, so we still have a few more minutes. But basically that idea of social construction of race, and this is a thing I've been reflecting on a lot as I've been converting and will continue to, but how that shapes, I know I pass as white and I have that privilege, but also I was raised with my dad trying to teach me Spanish and making arepas. Right? It's just am I white or not, or something in between? Because then I also have the Latina thing in there too. And it's but I also wasn't born into a Sephardic family. But I still feel oh, I have at least some affinity with that. Because arepas, my dad is from Venezuela and speaks Spanish fluently in addition to several other languages.
Yeah, so construction of race and who is white and who isn't white is so complicated. And as soon as you start putting up definitions, there's going to be people who fall out of it who shouldn't, and vice versa. The Latinx community in particular is one of the most vexing around this, because in many ways, Latinx are considered non-white, except a whole portion of the Latinx community definitely consider themselves white. So all I can say is yes, all of the above.
So as we're concluding here, Marc, what I was thinking, I love the way Ezra Klein ends his podcast with asking, what are the 3 books that you are reading on this topic? So I won't necessarily have to have 3, but, what are you reading? What are you thinking about? What would you point us to as we continue our exploration about issues of anti-Semitism on campus? What do you think are the best resources that are out there today? Because your book yet hasn't been published.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. On anti-Semitism, wow. So the UC Berkeley Hillel came up with a 13-minute video. I'm sure it's on their website, which I think is a great, complex cartoon that sort of lays out, how to deal, with anti-Semitism. The Brandeis Center in Washington, D.C., which I think Marc referenced, they're the sort of the leading national organization. They tend more to the political right than I am, but that said, I think Ken Marcus is absolutely brilliant. He's the leader of it, and he's internally consistent in all that he's doing. So I think that's great. And Academic Engagement Network, which are basically, for the most part, Jewish professors who are engaged in the fight against campus anti-Semitism and are taking it to activism. So if you go to Academic Engagement Network website, they've got tons of resources, and I used a bunch of them in my book too.
And is there any advice that you would give to Jewish students on campus?
Have fun, enjoy, engage. It's not bad. It's all good. And reach out and email if you're ever having a challenge.
And where should students go on campus if they are feeling there's a challenge?
Generally Hillel. Hillel is a place. It's just good to have grown-ups around and fellow Jewish people to talk to and to have support.
Thank you. Great to be with you. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Yes, and thank you for everybody for joining us. And we'll continue the conversation, and we look forward to your book.
Me too. Take care, everyone. So good to see you.
Bye-bye.